In this video, I'll show you how I made the tassets for my Skyrim glass armor set. To create the pattern for the base tasset panels, I measured out how large I wanted each panel and then folded a piece of paper in half and drew a curve from the bottom point up to the opposite edge of the paper. Then cut that out to create the panel pattern. There would be 3 patterns for the 4 panels. One pattern for both the left and right panels, one for the front, and one for the back. I sketched on some scrap paper to make the pattern piece for the top front panel decorative pieces, tracing the edge of a salsa bowl to get cleaner curves. I did the same thing for the larger decorative pieces for the back panel. After I was satisfied with my sketches, I traced over the lines with a black marker. Then I cut those out. I did a little bit of cleanup to get my tasset panels the appropriate length. Then it was time to start patterning out the scale pieces that would go on top of the base tasset panels. I matched the curve from the panel base to get the shape for the bottom scale, then drew lines at a slight angle to get the scales that would go above that. I drew registration marks, but that would not be necessary for how I put them together. I numbered them to keep them straight. Then I cut those shapes out. I made another set of the tasset scales that were smaller to go on the edges of the front and back panels as well as the side panels. Speaking of the side panels, after that I began to sketch out the pattern for the upper hip armor pieces. So that it would be a symmetrical piece, I sketched out the shape with the paper folded in half. Then I started transferring all of the pieces to foam. For the larger scales and decorative pieces, I used a thicker foam than for the smaller scales. It's important to keep the blade sharp while cutting out so many pieces, so I kept my sharpening stone nearby to sharpen the blade throughout the process. There were several pieces for the tassets, so this process was quite time-consuming. I kept a little diagram of the scales off to the side so I could keep track of how many of each piece I needed. After cutting all of the pieces out, I took a rotary tool to smooth out and round over all the edges to give them a cleaner look. For each of the scale pieces, I also used the rotary tool to carve a line down the center inside to help them bend. Then it was time to pull out the heat gun and heat seal and heat form all the pieces. First I heated up the scale pieces to heat seal the foam and get rid of the fuzzy bits from sanding. Then I folded them in half to get the bend I needed. Here they are laid out on the paper pattern pieces. After this, I realized I needed to adjust the side panels to be a little smaller. Then I cut out the windows in the patterns for the larger decorative pieces so that I could recreate the details on the pieces. I also sketched out more lines on the hip armor pattern to give them more detail. And then I cut out all of the curved strips and placed the cut patterns onto the foam pieces to sketch the details onto the foam. For the hip piece, I placed the pattern strips individually and traced around them. Then I could start heat forming the larger pieces. I heated them up, then held them to myself where I would have them placed on the armor. Then I took them back outside and, while wearing a respirator mask, began to use a wood burning tool to carve in the details I drew on in pen. For the hip pieces, I turned the wood burning tool at an angle to add texture in between the little curved stripe areas to give it more of a leather look than the other pieces, which were meant to look like they were made from refined malachite or golden metal. Then I took my makeshift cardboard spray booth and covered each foam piece in a layer of Plasti-Dip. Here is the fabric that I decided to use for the faux leather pieces for this costume, including the base panels of the tassets. I cut out the panel pieces from this fabric and put two matching pieces right sides together and sewed around the edges, leaving the top flat side open. After that, I flipped it right sides out. I had sewn pockets into the underside of the side panels with the idea that I could put my phone and things like identification and money for conventions in them, but with the whole costume on, I ended up not really being able to access these pockets. But it was still a neat idea for a costume feature. Then I turned in the top edges to close it up and stitched around all of the edges to get it to lay flatter. For simpler costume storage, I wanted 3 of my 4 tasset panels to be joined, with one panel that detached, making it easier to fold. Using parachute clips, I attached the pronged piece to the inside of the left hip panel and the joining piece to the inside of the front panel. Then I repeated this for the right hip panel. To join up the remaining panels to be permanently connected, I simply sewed on a small strip of the same faux leather fabric to attach each remaining panel. And here is how that went together. Here I am trying to put my phone into the pocket, which was not easy and was much more difficult with the full set of armor on. To weather it a little bit and make it so that the thread did not show up so well, I took a wash of dark brown acrylic paint and went over all of the white threads. Back to the foam pieces. After the Plasti-Dip had time to dry, I started painting all of the scales. For the gold scales, I painted 3 or 4 layers of brown to act as a base, and a couple layers of gray paint to the scales that would be teal. All of the bottom scales that were a sort of shield shape would be the teal color, and all of the other scales would be gold. I also made sure to paint all of the edges so that they would be covered when viewed at different angles. For this reason, I painted onto the backs a little as well. Then I started painting the larger decorative pieces as well, continuing to match up the bases with the parts that would be gold and brown and the parts that would be teal and gray. For the faux leather hip armor, I painted them brown. In the more textured areas, I went in with a darker brown. Then I dry brushed over the surface with a lighter brown to continue giving it dimension and make it look more like leather. Then I started painting all of the areas that needed to be gold over the brown bases with the iridescent gold coarse acrylic paint by Golden. And then I went over the gray bases with the teal acrylic paint, also by Golden. I mixed up a darker teal to put into the creases, smudging it out. Then I came back over the surface with the main teal again to clean that up. After it dried, I took the interference green, also by Golden, and went over all of the teal areas. And here's the difference with and without the interference green color. To create some highlights or scratch marks, I took the same interference green, a little thicker, and made quick swapping motions. I scraped away any excess with my fingernails. Then I came back and cleaned up any areas on the gold that were needed. After that, I used copper to start tarnishing the gold pieces. I put this in any kind of dents, on the edges, and any spaces where the teal met the gold. I did this for the larger pieces as well as the small tacet scales. Here's the subtle difference of with and without the copper tarnishing. After all of the pieces had been painted and dried, I mixed up some resin to put over all of the teal areas to give it the nice sheen that the refined malachite has in the game. I poured the resin onto the surface and spread it with a popsicle stick. After it had cured enough to handle, but was still a bit malleable, I used scissors to trim the excess and file down the edges. Here are the little scrap resin pieces. Then it was finally time to assemble the tassets. Here you can see how the fabric base unclips to have the 3 joining panels and single panel. So I lined up how I wanted it to look to give myself an idea of how to place the pieces, and then used E6000 glue to attach the faux buckle decorative pieces. Then I took some ribbon and glued it across the top tasset scale and pressed it down onto the fabric. Then to join each scale, giving them ability to move as I moved, I glued one end of a ribbon under a tasset scale and then glued the other end of the ribbon under another tasset scale. I decided to switch to hot glue for this to hold it down more securely while I worked. I continued on with this method, adding glue first to the underside of the tasset scale, pressing the ribbon down into it, then adding glue to the underside of the next scale and the opposite end of the ribbon down into that. Then I came back with more hot glue and went over the top of the ribbon ends to try to hold this more securely together. I continued for each scale in the line. Here is one of the lines of scales. Afterwards, I laid them out to make sure they were positioned how I wanted before actually attaching them to the fabric panels. I attached these to the fabric panels with hot glue as well. Then I clipped it back together, and you can see how they move. Here's how the final tassets turned out. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel. If you have any questions about my first foam armor build, feel free to ask me in the comments below. I've created a playlist for my glass armor build work logs and have linked it on screen as well as in the description box below. Thanks again and have a great day.